I'm joined now by Kevin Roberts, president of the Heritage Foundation, doing so much important work in Washington. Kevin, thanks so much for coming on, man. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, Stu. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, you get to get out of Washington, D.C. This can't be the worst outcome for you.
It's far from the worst outcome. In fact, anytime you get out of Washington, even when there are good things going on, it's always good to be with real people.
Yeah, it's true. It's a fascinating time in Washington right now because there's so much going on. I don't think anybody could have looked at the Trump administration and said, I want them to go a little quicker. I want them to do a little bit more. I mean, they are taking everything on all at once. I think that's the right strategy, right?
It is the right strategy because they have to meet the moment. The moment is created by the American people who've been saying for so many decades, elites in Washington, New York, and Brussels are running roughshod over us. And you and I both know, your audience certainly knows, that what Trump is trying to fix isn't just a few years of wrong policy. Mm-hmm. It's like 75 years of really bad public policy, occasionally interrupted by some Republican administrations. And so if you're going to fix that in time, that reinstills confidence in the American people that the American dream is still possible, then you got to move fast. And so hats off to the president and his entire cabinet for doing so.
Because we know how these administrations work, especially in like today's media cycles, right? You have a small window to do what you want to do. And I think that's why he's been aggressive in so many different areas. You think about, men playing in women's sports and, the border, which has been, I think, an unqualified success so far. Now, I will say I'm not a big tariff guy. I am, I'm kind of an old school free trader. I'm skeptical, hopeful that things come out of this. What's your view on Trump's approach to tariffs?
Well, I share most of what you just said. Obviously, we at Heritage do. We are, in fact, supportive of free trade, which is why if the tariff regime that is going to be implemented is focused on reciprocity, on targeting the worst actors, starting with China, then we're very comfortable with that at China. But at Heritage, to your point, though, Stu, that's not what was announced. There's a 10% categorical tariff on everyone in the world. We think that the administration would be better off, both in substance and in politics, to calibrate that, as they're no doubt going to make some modifications, to really focus on the worst actors. And the reason for that is there are a lot of political wins and economic wins to pick up if you take that more targeted approach, and you're going to get people like you who are a little skeptical of a universal tariff to stay on the team. You're going to stay on the team regardless, probably. But the point is, you've got to be able to sustain this pace that you talk about politically. You've got to make sure that even if you put the stock market off to the side, that the other deleterious effects of a big tariff regime might actually go away if it's much more targeted and the people know that it's short term, until you start fixing these systemic problems that the administration cares so much about.
Yeah, I think it's important to have that type of approach. And look, I'm a Philadelphia Eagles fan, which is not always easy. I don't know if you know Super Bowl champs, but I will
have to be reminded.
I still will be critical of calls. Nick Sirianni makes the wrong call. I'm going to be critical of it, and I think that's kind of where I am on this one. I go back and I grew up going through politics and learning about it. One of the big things was the Heritage Economic Freedom Index, right? And one of the components of that index is free trade. It's trade freedom. It's one of the 12? I'm thinking right, 12 components.
12.
It's been a while.
You're a great student.
Yeah. We aren't at the top of that list anymore. We were much closer to it at one point. We've been falling for a while in that particular category, and this is going to make us fall toward the bottom, I think. I mean, these tariffs are. It depends on how you look at them, but I mean, I think when you look at the approach, the way they form them, which was really based more on trade deficits and such, rather than the actual tariff rates. I mean, it doesn't seem like he's built a path in there, even if the opposing country goes to zero tariffs, that they can even go away.
Well, I love that you mentioned our Index of Economic Freedom and the really important component of trade freedom. This is why we believe reciprocal tariffs are the answer. It allows you to use a methodology being very precise down to the industry, in some cases down to the company, and say that is unfair toward the American worker, whom we all want to benefit from this. Focus on that, and then what you're going to see, along with the deregulation agenda that the Trump administration is implementing, that the United States trade freedom score on our index will actually go up. To your point, the across-the-board tariff, I think, is a tactical mistake. And it may have long-term consequences that are negative that actually undo the glorious motivation of the administration, which is to reset an unfair trade agenda that's been foisted upon the United States, but very much to your point, Stu, that's getting lost in how this has been rolled out. The good news is two things. Number one, the administration's diagnosis is spot on correct. For too long, other countries have used the trope of free trade when they themselves are not practicing free trade. Yeah. And so the administration's correcting that. But the second thing, which we're fully supportive of at Heritage, is that we have seen manufacturing in this country decline. We have seen for the first time everyday Americans say the American dream isn't possible for us. Government isn't going to be the entire answer to that. Tariffs certainly will not be. Yeah. But using reciprocal tariffs as one of 5 or 6 or 7 components to get us there, I think is a good answer.
What do you think about, because I think the most unfair thing that China does, like they're stealing our IP, they're stealing our technology, they're doing things that are, I would argue, completely illegal, not even just like, kind of frowned upon. Is there a path for us? Because I look at our manufacturing jobs here, and these numbers are a little bit old and they're kind of in the back of my head, so excuse me. But it's something like $33 to $40 an hour for a manufacturing job in the United States, which is a good, solid, middle class job. In China, it's like $4 an hour. Okay, so you see how just dramatic it is. I don't even know if tariffs bridge that gap completely, but somewhere like India or Bangladesh is even less, right? Like it's $2 or it's $1 an hour. Is there a path where we can try to have better relationships with friends? And the one I come back to all the time is India, where, again, they're not exactly like us. We're not going to elect, their leaders as our leaders. Like, we're not the same cultures. But they have a sense of friendship with us that a country like China does not. India, not an adversary of us. Is there a way to encourage more of that development in those countries rather than what seems to me to be pie in the sky to bring all those jobs back here?
Two things, 3 really. The first is you're spot on correct about the importance of India for American foreign policy. In fact, I think for the remainder of the 21st century, the great opportunity for improving America's strength in the world is developing a closer alliance with India. And they're showing signs really for the first time in their history, because they've played this game of being friends with the United States, with Russia and China all at the same time, sure, of being much more oriented, not just to America, but to Donald Trump. Trump deserves a lot of credit for this.
They love him.
We ought to tap into that.
Nobody loves him, yeah.
It leads me to the second point, which is that the first step India could take is to eliminate their egregiously gross agricultural tariffs.
Yes.
That tariff is an example of why we ought to have a reciprocal tariff regime. But it leads me to the third point, which is this. A lot of those jobs can stay in India. This is not a zero-sum game.
Right.
If we get the economic system reset in a way that really favors our allies, but most importantly favors American workers, what you're going to see is that reciprocal tariffs, along with deregulation, along with good geopolitics, along with tax cuts, along with cutting the federal budget, lead to a revitalization of America's economy. At the end of the day, this isn't just an economic issue. It's an issue of political economy. It's an issue of saying, as important as trade and GDP are to understanding a country's health, so is the marriage rate. So is the ability of a 30-year-old married couple who can't afford to buy a house because of really terrible policy. Mm-hmm. What Trump and Vance are telling us is that's the problem they want to solve. I would submit to them as a friend. Heritage certainly very friendly to the administration. The way to achieve that, if you're going to use tariffs as one of the many tools, is to focus on reciprocity. And the India example is perfect.
Yeah. What's our goal here, would you say, Kevin? Because I think when I look at it, I get a conflicted vision a little bit, which is, hey, Donald Trump's a negotiator. We all know that, right? He comes out and, gives all these big numbers on tariffs. Like, I can get behind an approach, even if I might not like the means exactly. If the goal is to get everybody to, let's say, zero tariffs or some real free trade, that's a great goal. And whether his approach is exactly right, it's not me. I didn't win the election. Nobody voted for me. So, if that's his approach, I can be behind that goal. The other side is, I also support the goal of returning some jobs to America. I want Americans to have good jobs. So I agree on both of those goals, but I do feel at some level they're at conflict where if, like with Israel, right, we came in and we said, hey, these tariffs are coming. Israel preemptively lowers their tariffs to 0%. They were very low anyway. But if everyone did that, then in theory, these jobs wouldn't be coming back to the United States, right? If our goal is to get the jobs back to the United States, we would theoretically want these tariffs to be high. What is the actual goal? Which one of these is what we're going for here?
Your question's excellent, and so I'm not being argumentative, at least intentionally, by responding the way that I will.
I'm legitimately confused.
I think if you take it from theory to practice, and I think that's where it becomes difficult for people who subscribe significantly to free trade theory, is that in practice, that's been used as an abuse against the United States. But the real problem in practice is that you have to put this also on a timeline.
Yeah.
And so what we think is going to happen at Heritage, if this is done well, if there's a recalibration back to reciprocal tariffs, is that you're going to see countries like Israel, India, others, Taiwan, no doubt, England, perhaps, the UK, negotiate with the United States. That's going to preserve jobs in those countries, very much to your point. But because it's not a zero-sum game, and because reciprocal tariffs would be one tool being done in conjunction with deregulation, with lowering the federal deficit and budget, with tax cuts, you're going to see American capital have a certainty about investing to do what? To create new jobs. Will we see Pittsburgh in 2035 be the Pittsburgh of 1935? Not likely. No. But could you see in Pittsburgh, rather than have a brand new steel mill, although that would be great, have a micronuclear facility that is creating energy for AI jobs? 100%. That's the kind of economy that Trump and Vance are trying to rebuild. And I think the more that they and their cabinet officials in the coming days and weeks talk about that aspirational vision, the more that friends like you who have a very healthy and legitimate skepticism about the universal tariff regime will say, I can be part of that, and I'm going to be an accountability partner on the outside to help you get us there.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, I think I started this with saying how much they're doing. Understandable, maybe they haven't emphasized that yet. It does seem to be on the path for this year, right? That is something that these big tax cuts and incentives and deregulation, all still on the table. We haven't heard much about it yet, but it feels like it's been 4 years already, but it's only been a few months, Kevin.
It's so true. Look, Donald Trump's been talking about tariffs and the unfair economic system since he was a young professional. And so it's natural that he would be so excited about announcing this. And while we at Heritage certainly are not protectionists, and maybe the president is a little bit more of one than we would ever be, you can understand the excitement. And I think he's owed some grace to be able to have certainly a full year to put this whole system in place. And we're really confident at Heritage that that's precisely what his team is doing. I happen to think, in addition to all of the smart people in the cabinet, that the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, is the real person to watch here, because he's the person who I think can uniquely bring calm to the capital markets to explain, stick with us for an economic quarter, for a second economic quarter. He has a great track record that I think causes him to have a lot of trust. I think by the time we get to the end of the year, that we will look back and say, this is working. And if it's working, that means we're not just succeeding in having countries play fair baseball, fair ball with us. They're actually contributing to the renewal of the American economy, and that's way overdue.
Well, unlike the media, I will give it a fair chance, and I will judge it on its merits. That's what we're supposed to do in this world, I thought. Unfortunately, the media never does that. Kevin Roberts, Dr. Kevin Roberts, I should be more respectful, president of the Heritage Foundation. I'm not a doctor, so you don't have to call me that.
Kevin is really preferred.
Kevin's preferred. Kevin has been here from the Heritage Foundation. Kevin, thanks so much, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Stu.